Hi, everyone. Welcome to the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books. I'm Andrew Luria, news anchor at Fox 5 San Diego, also author of the middle grade series, The Adventures of Charlie Marley. And welcome to this panel with author W. Bruce Cameron. Bruce, great to see you. So happy to have you here. As you all very well may know, Bruce is a #1 New York Times and USA Today bestseller. As an author, he is known best for A Dog's Purpose, that whole series, as well as movies, the TV series 8 Simple Rules, and also author of a number of other book series, including A Puppy Tale, with Cooper's Story being the latest offering from that. We're going to be talking about Cooper's Story, as well as a number of other things, Bruce, within your career. So thank you for being here. Excited to talk to you about your books and your career. Tell us a little bit about the influence you feel like your writing has as we get started here, because to me, you've really changed my perspective of dogs and our relationship with them.
And that wasn't my intent. I wanted you to always have a perspective on dogs. But I did realize when I got going with these, what we call the puppy tales, that I was having an impact as an author that I didn't anticipate, which is that reluctant readers are going to these books because the way in is so easy. They can identify with the main character because the main character is a dog. So I have been to schools that I've talked to librarians and teachers and parents who say, I've got a kid that won't read, except this child will read your books because of the dog angle. And if I can also teach the lesson that dogs are thinking, feeling, sentient beings, and we should be taking care of them because we control their destiny from the moment they became dogs. We are the ones that we came up with dachshunds and Shih Tzus and evolution wouldn't have done that. We seized control of their evolution, and we removed from them the ability to hunt for themselves. You don't see a pack of dachshunds taking down a wildebeest. So we owe them their livelihood. We have to take care of them, and they deserve it.
When you sit down to write, how much do you think about the reader on the other end and the experience that they're going to have and take away from your books?
No one has ever asked me that question, and I'm sort of ashamed to say that I don't really picture the typical reader. My obligation is to the story and the characters in the story. That's what I feel like I'm tending. That's what I'm doing when I start to write. I guess I just hope that the end reader is going to be satisfied with the story. But I also feel like if I'm satisfied with the story, at least one reader is going to enjoy the book.
I can tell you, I can promise you that is the case, because I really do think when I watch the movie and I read your books, the movies, I'm influenced. My perspective on animals is changed, and I wonder how. I introduced you, but I forgot to introduce the best friend behind you, Tucker. How has your relationship with your own dogs influenced your writing of all of these books?
Well, if I wrote about Tucker, it would be the chapter 1 would be nap, chapter 2 would be nap, chapter 3 would be nap. And he's a great dog. He doesn't like to go for walks. So I've never had a dog like that. And I'm like, you have to want to go for walks. It's in the dog manual. You can read it. And he's like, no, you go. You're good. I'm good. And I just think if we just let him, he would just lie on pillows all day long. And he's 10 years old, which is not young for a dog, but for a little dog, he probably has a lot more miles left. But he's not gonna do those miles on foot. I'm here to tell you, he's gonna sleep through the whole thing.
I definitely want to get into how you come to develop these characters. We're going to get into that in a moment. But first, I want to ask you about just really the number of books you've written at this point. You have more than 30 books out there. I believe you had 7 or so in the works last year alone. Like, how do you balance all of these books?
I'm pretty sequential. I don't like to be developing 2 books at the same time, like to be an outline stage with more than one book that would bug me. But the minute I send off a book to the publisher, I'm already on to the next. And but I so enjoy what I'm doing. This used to be my hobby. I never made any money writing. I didn't sell my first book until I was 40. And now I'm 42 or something. So no, but I mean, my whole life I wrote and nothing came of it. And now I can do it. It doesn't have to be something that I sneak away from my day job to do. So that's my process, is to go sequentially, just mow through them, and I'm having a blast.
So some books sell, even now with your success level. Some books sell, some books don't. Is it discouraging when certain books don't catch on the way you might expect them to? And on the other side, how thrilling is it when they really do?
Yeah, I've become the dog book guy, and I'm okay with that. I really am. But when I stray outside of my lane at all, people start honking at me. So I've got a mystery series. I wrote a couple of books in the mystery series. It didn't really catch on. People who read it loved it, but it's called the Repo Madness series, and it's a series of books about a repo man who winds up solving crimes. And they're funny and quirky. And I wrote a book that I'm very proud of called The Dog Master, about the time in the Paleolithic era where all of a sudden, instead of being hunted by wolves, we domesticated them to the point where we could hunt with them. And it changed I believe it is the pivotal event in our species. I really do. Very proud of that one. That one also, it just wasn't a happy puppy book. And so people want books with a real cute puppy on the cover. And I'm okay with that. That works out great.
So you wrote, I believe, 9 books before you finally got one published. You've had a number that, some of these series you're talking about that are really well-written books, but they just don't catch on. How do you keep pushing yourself forward and sit back down at the computer and say, let's keep going, regardless of the fact that this hasn't succeeded to this point?
Yeah, and when I was writing these books, keep in mind, it was not a computer, it was a typewriter at first. So this is what I wanted to do more than anything. And you're right, I wrote 9 unpublished books before I sold my first one. Number 10 was the lucky number for me. And some people said, when are you going to learn from your mistakes? And I sort of said, I am learning from my mistakes. Every time I write a book, I learn something about the process. And maybe when I would read books on writing, they never really clicked with me. It seemed like the people that were writing to people about writing books were not talking to me for some reason. I just had to stumble onto the formula myself. And it really was, it was book number 9, which also is never sold. But in that book, I had decided at that point in my life, I was never going to sell a book. So I gave up trying to write for the marketplace and just wrote for myself. And when I let myself be free, it turned out I was funny. I didn't really know that if I just let the characters be who they were, that they'd start saying really funny stuff. And so that led me eventually to having a humor book that sold called 8 Simple Rules for Dating My Teenage Daughter. Changed my life. I moved out to LA to work on the show, and I have been here ever since.
It's interesting too, because some people might not know your background. You said you had a day job, obviously, while you're writing these books that aren't putting food on the table. You have these day jobs, and one was in the repo business, wasn't it? So you're able to have that experience. You're also a humor columnist for newspapers. So all these things did build to what you did, but then somehow you shifted over to this other direction that's really taking you to the top of the mountain.
Yeah, it really was the dog book thing that changed everything. I mean, the TV show was great, but as we know, that ended kind of tragically when John Ritter passed away. And then it was like, well, I sold a few pilots and things like that, but they didn't take off. And then gradually it seemed like I was just being sent farther and farther away from show business. But then, A Dog's Purpose took a long time, took 7 years from the time we wrote the screenplay till the time it was in theaters, but that reignited everything.
What was your breakout moment where you go from, all these books you're writing and you're enjoying it for your own sake and probably learning a lot along the way? But what was the moment where things just broke out and changed? Was it 8 Simple Rules?
Yeah, I wrote a column called 8 Simple Rules for Dating My Teenage Daughter. And the reason I only wrote 8 rules was because I only had 700 words. I mean, there were a lot more rules, but I wrote the 8, and that column hit the newspaper that I sold it to, the Rocky Mountain News, syndicated it, and it went all over the world. And I got so much email from all over the world and I was like, oh, it turns out fathers are a little alarmed when their teenage daughter suddenly has some guy knocking on the front door. And if they knock, a lot of them just pull in the driveway and honk. And that's rule number 1. If you pull in the driveway and honk, you better be delivering a package, because you're not picking anything up. But that changed everything. Yeah. And because of all those emails, and because of that, I was able to prove the popularity. We were able to sell the book on a spec, on a proposal to a publishing company. And then it opened up and it got on the bestseller list, and it just changed my life. That was the pivotal moment, the publication of that column, and how popular it was compared to anything else I'd ever done.
I want to talk about Cooper's story here momentarily, but I do want to ask you before we move on. You talked about you made mistakes in these first 9 books that you wrote, and you finally learned as you progressed. For writers out there, what kind of mistakes did you make that you learned most from?
Oh, I think the big one was writing about things that I really didn't know about, and not really doing research. I mean, probably my first really serious novel was about a middle-aged man whose business was failing and his marriage was failing. Well, I wasn't married, I wasn't middle-aged, and my business was at that point I was driving an ambulance. That wasn't failing. So I really didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was writing about. I had this sense though that this would be a really great epic novel, and it wasn't. And the other mistake I make all the time, and I tell this whenever someone says, "What's your tip?" I say, always know how it's going to end. Because so many writers get bogged down because they have a great idea for a world, and they have a great idea for how it starts. But if you don't know the ending to your book, don't write. Don't start writing. It's like you wouldn't get in a car and just drive and not know what your destination was, unless you're like my mom, and she would get lost all the time. But for most people, absolutely, they know where they're going, right? So do that with your books.
So when you write, you outline this a number of times. You have, from what I understand, a whole diagram of things to make sure that you get to that conclusion, right?
Absolutely. I do. It looks a little insane. Someone saw it yesterday and says, this looks like something a serial killer would have on his wall. But I diagram every single step. And that gives me the ability to sort of move the scenes around to realize, oh, we need to meet this character earlier. I didn't really see it until I had it all mapped out on the whiteboard. And I rewrite the outline several times. Sometimes with some books, like with Cooper's story, it took me more time to outline the book and get the outline right than it took me to actually write the book.
Wow. So let's talk about Cooper's story. This is a book as part of the Puppy Tales series. And you wrote the Dog's Purpose series. Maybe some parents thought, okay, this is a little intense, maybe for my younger readers. So you went down this road. Tell me about going down the Puppy Tale series road, how that kind of developed, and also how Cooper's story differentiates itself from other books in the series.
Yeah, I didn't know that I was going to do this. What happened was, when we were working on the script for A Dog's Purpose, there's this great dog in there named Ellie, who's the search and rescue dog. And in the movie, she's got like 90 seconds of screen time. It's just over like that. Mm-hmm. And then I did have parents say, I would love for my son, who's 9, to read your book, but it's a little intense. I mean, there's some things that happen in it that are pretty scary. And couldn't you figure out a way to rewrite A Dog's Purpose for little kids? And I said, I don't know how to do that, but I'm so frustrated with what happened with Ellie. I would like to write that story. So I wrote Ellie's story. Just no idea that anything was going to happen, but it won awards and it sold really well. And my publisher said, we need more of these. And that just set me down the track of writing stories that are sort of based on what I call my grown-up books. Cooper's story is my favorite of all the puppy tales because of how different Cooper is from a lot of these dogs. In a book called Bailey's Story, I write about the relationship between a boy and his dog, and it's an adventure story, but it's really just about the two of them bonding and loving each other. In Cooper's story, Cooper has a very interesting owner. His boy is in a wheelchair. His boy Burke, and Burke is a very strong willed child who believes that it would be wrong for him to adopt a service dog out of an agency or out of an organization that trains dogs to help people in wheelchairs. He thinks that needs to go to somebody else. He'll do his training. He'll train his dog his way. And so you have a real clash of wills right from the beginning, where Cooper wants to be a happy dog. He just wants to be a dog. And Burke intends for him to be a service dog. So Cooper has to figure out what is going on, that he's not like other dogs. And Burke has to overcome he is so focused on himself in terms of like he's gonna make the rules, he's gonna decide how to train a dog, and Burke needs to back away from that a little bit too and learn how to sort of get out and enjoy life more. And the two of them make a real great partnership. I love the relationship between Cooper and Burke in the book Cooper's Story. So it's kind of my favorite. It really, really is.
Yeah, it's really neat to kind of get into the mind of what a dog might be going through when it's being trained, because I don't think we really realize, the difficulty. It's like, sit. Well, why don't you just sit? Well, they don't speak the language that we speak.
Yeah, that's right.
But, the other thing that was kind of tough, I think, as a reader is, Cooper's got this best friend, Lacey, when he's a puppy. And, that's, you realize the separation that comes from a dog leaving their pack, leaving their friends and their family to go to a new forever home. Tell me a little bit about that relationship with Cooper and Lacey, and also how you kind of got into the mind of a dog. I'm sure you've done that many times throughout the series that you've written, but how do you get into the mind of a dog to go through that training process?
Yeah, I wanted to write about something that happens all the time to dogs, but we don't really think about very much, which is the impact it has on a dog to suddenly be sort of dislocated from the original family, the original pack, and go to live with somebody else. And because dogs are so full of joy and they are optimistic and they seem like they get over it in an instant. And it's like, okay, now you're my owner. I mean, Tucker will just follow anybody, I'm walking with Tucker and I think he's loyal to me, and then he'll spot some other person and he'll be like, I'm going to go live with her, so, right. He hears me saying his name, so he's looking around. So I wanted to write about that. I wanted to write about how that looks from the dog's perspective. They are optimistic and they do adapt, and they are not as troubled by it as like we would be if it happened to us as humans. But on the other hand, it must have some impact. And getting into the mind of a dog is difficult for me because of the fact that dogs are a little simple, and they all share kind of the same common traits. I mean, every dog is an optimist. Every dog wants to go for a car ride, doesn't know where we're going, happy to get there. If you're just going to the gas station and coming home, the dog thought that was a great trip. And that pretty much is true of all dogs. So every dog, then I have to try to figure out, well, why is this dog different? Why is Cooper different than Molly? What makes Toby so interesting in Toby's story? And it has a lot to do with the circumstances and reflecting their personalities off the people they're with. But there comes a time when I have to just tell myself, this dog is too much like another dog, and I've got to fix that. That's my obligation as a storyteller, is to not tell the same story over and over again.
So, one of the things that's really interesting is, dogs like to have jobs. I've heard you say, dogs like to work. And you really highlight that in Cooper's story, where this dog realizes, oh, there's a treat there, but I'm working right now. Or my best friend's there, but I'm working right now. And the fact that service dogs are such important workers for the people that they work with. You talk about a little bit about highlighting those with disabilities, those who need service dogs or emotional support dogs, and why it was important maybe for you to make that part of Cooper's story.
Yeah, I have a very close friend who has always had a service dog because he's wheelchair bound, and so he is always with his companion, and his companion does a lot of things for him. The companion dog will open the refrigerator for him, as an example. And I had to, I just continued to ask questions. My way of doing research is to have conversations with people. It's less informative for me to read a book because books kind of distill things down and give you a lot of facts. But I wanted to find out what is it like emotionally to bring a dog into your life and then figure out how that partnership is going to work. So Cooper is, as you can see, he's got Malamute in him. We say in the book that this looks like a purebred Malamute to me. We say in the book he's got a little bit of Great Dane because Cooper needs to be a big dog. There are times when he's pulling the wheelchair. And so with Malamute blood in him, that is actually something that Cooper is sort of naturally inclined to do. And that makes him just a great companion for Burke.
How different has it been, easier, harder, to develop this series, the Puppy Tale series, versus the Dog's Purpose series? And I guess you're doing it kind of simultaneously.
Yeah, it's all happening at once. There's another series as well. It's called Lily to the Rescue, and it's for younger readers that are even younger than the Puppy Tales, and so I've got those three series going on all the time. I don't know that I'll ever write another book in A Dog's Purpose series, but I will note that when I wrote A Dog's Purpose, I didn't think I was going to write another book in this series, and then I wrote A Dog's Journey, and of course both Purpose and Journey have been made into movies. And we've written the screenplay for Promise, which is the third in the series. So we'll just see. And in every case, I thought, okay, I'm done. But then I just, I created a character in A Dog's Purpose. It's a dog who never dies. So if the dog never dies, keeps coming back to life, well, then what? I guess it could continue to have relationships and a life. And that's what I did with A Dog's Promise. And we'll see where that goes. I've also got another series. It's my A Dog's Way Home series. I just happen to have these sitting here on my coffee table. Started with A Dog's Way Home, and this is A Dog's Courage that was out in May. That's another series. This dog doesn't reincarnate, but the dog in A Dog's Way Home got lost and found her way back across the Rocky Mountains. In A Dog's Courage, she gets separated by a fire in the mountains and has to now evade the fire, evade all that natural disaster, evade predator animals that have been displaced by the fire and are panicking and are not themselves, and find her way back to save her. Well, she thinks of him as a boy, but her friend, her forever friend, Lucas, who's now a doctor, but she has to find her way back to him.
Writing is a lot of different things to a lot of different people. You obviously have so many great series and so many different storylines that you are able to create. Is writing still fun for you? Is it a chore at times? What is writing to you?
Writing is somewhere between a joy and an addiction. I spend a lot of time lecturing myself that I need to stop writing for the day and get some exercise, because it just seems like that's all I want to do is write. And I just take to it. I just love it. It's the greatest thing. I love the blank page. I love the outlining. I love rewriting. I love getting the editorial notes from my publisher and going through those and fixing things. I love every aspect of it. And the only part I'll say that's tough is when we're adapting one of my books for a screenplay, I have to read the thing. And this is usually after about a year. And I find myself wanting to fix, I see things that I think, oh, I could write that better now. I need to get back. When I read the audio version of Cooper's story, my director kept talking into my headphones and saying, that's not what it says. And I said, yeah, but it's better the way I just said it. And he said, yeah, but you have to read it exactly as you wrote it. So that's the hard part for me. That's the only downside of this whole job.
When you sit down to write, how do you get into character, if you will? How do you get into that world, shut out everything that's going on around you, and focus in on what this dog might be thinking, what this character might be thinking, and kind of create that world within your mind?
Once I let those characters start talking, they won't shut up. So I've just finished another book that will be published a little less than a year from now, and very strong, very different characters. And the characters, once I let them start talking to each other, I eventually had to interrupt the conversation and say, we're done here. We got to keep moving on. It is literally true that once I've figured out who the character is, I can have that voice in my head whenever I want it. And with a dog, it's kind of the same thing. I mean, I come from the place of the dog is narrating, it's from dog point of view. When I'm writing Cooper's story, I'm thinking about, well, what is it like for this dog to be a puppy and then gradually be led to the conclusion that he has more important work to do than just play. And but I can still hear Cooper's voice in my head if I let it.
Hmm. What do you read? What influences you? I mean, you've written for TV, you've written for movies, books, newspaper. How do they differ, and how does what you read inspire what you write?
Thank you for that question, because I am going to surprise you and say I don't read books. I don't read dog books. Because my focus is on my dog books, and I don't want to be influenced by other people's ideas. I don't want someone to say, "Hey, I read this book and it reminds me of this other book that I read, and I think you stole something from that." I'd be like, "No, that's a coincidence. That happens." So when I read, I'm reading historical thrillers and mysteries, murder mysteries, mystery thrillers. I read books that are not like what I write.
And it's pretty amazing. Have you read like dog books before? Have you read Marley and Me? Have you read other books like that?
Yeah. My history with dog books started with Old Yeller, and I was so furious at my father when I got to the end of that book that I almost wouldn't speak to him. I mean, I threw the book. I was that angry. And I've read a lot of dog books. I had to reread The Incredible Journey because I wanted to make sure when I wrote A Dog's Way Home that I wasn't just writing The Incredible Journey. And so I reread it. Luckily, my book's nothing like that. So I get really focused on not reading the dog books, but I did read Marley and Me. Did read Art of Racing in the Rain. So I read them occasionally. But I also find that my tone, my point of view and everything is kind of unique. It's really different. The Art of Racing in the Rain is a dog that speaks English, understands English. None of my dogs understand English. They're dogs. They recognize a few words, but they don't know what you're saying. They can't interpret what you're saying. They can't watch you drive and think that you're doing a bad job of it. They don't. They're dogs.
I like how you translate the English language, though, through the dogs, where they say the words, but then they kind of pick out the words that they recognize. Or when Burke's swimming, for example, they say, "Oh, the character or all the kids got to the other side of the pool, then realized that their dogs were on this side, so they started to come back." So I like how you kind of
yeah. Yeah, I think that's how a dog interprets the world. Very, very focused on the relationship with their owners, of course, but also not really understanding what's going on. In my series, Lily to the Rescue, Lily is a rescue dog who lives at a rescue and helps rescue other animals, usually baby animals, most of the time by mistake. Most of the time, Lily has no idea that she has saved the life of a skunk that has no stinker, as an example. That's just how Lily rolls through the world.
All right, Bruce, a couple more questions here before we wrap it up. One thing I want to know is, what do you think your books and your characters have in common, in addition to just having the dog theme, as far as their evolution, over time and over distance? What commonalities do you think your stories have?
Yeah, there was that thing that I discovered a long time ago, which is that if I let my voice go, it will go funny. I think dogs are hilarious. And so I believe that a common thread is that the way the dogs see the world is actually pretty funny. And I just don't, I mean, there's stuff happens. There's a lot of drama in my books. But I believe that in the end, there's still so much humor. There's so much misinterpretation. And then there's so much love. I mean, dogs just love us. That's their purpose. We bred them to love us. They can't help but love us. So I say, let's love them back.
That's terrific. And lastly, let me ask you, Bruce, what advice you have for writers out there. You've been through it. You're somebody who started, I believe, in 4th grade. Bad luck, Bruce.
Yes.
Is that ring a bell, right? Somebody's been writing.
Yeah, that one didn't sell either.
I'm sure it inspired a lot of good things in your career. But what advice do you have for people? You've been through a lot, and it took you all the way to 40 years old to even really get your career really started, and now you've excelled so well since then.
Yeah, I would say that the measure of success for a writer, especially in today's world, has got to be that the book is the best the writer can do. And I think that I always tell, especially children who are like, I want to be a writer. What advice do you have? And I say, here's my advice. If it's good enough for you, it's good enough. So don't let someone tell you that you wrote a bad story or that it's not very good or it'll never be published. Instead, focus on making it good enough for you. Because if you have written it once and it's not, and you see things that are problematic with it, well, then it's not good enough because it's not good enough for you. So it's a double-edged sword. You have to absolutely write until you're satisfied with it. But once you're satisfied with it, don't let anybody tell you it's not good because it's good enough for you.
I'm glad that you didn't listen to the first 9 books, the people who read those and didn't give you the shot that you deserve. But we're glad that it all worked out. We want to say thank you so much. Thank you so much, W. Bruce Cameron. You can purchase Bruce's books through the indie bookseller partners at bookshop.org/shop/SDFOB for the Festival of Books. You can also go to Bruce's website, www.wbrucecamron.com. We also ask you please consider supporting the San Diego Council on Literacy by visiting literacysandiego.org. You can also continue to join us for a full program of author panels, demonstrations, and live entertainment streamed entirely online this year. All the videos will be available on sdfestivalofbooks.com. Once again, I'm Andrew Luria, news anchor at Fox 5 San Diego, author of the middle grade series, The Adventures of Charlie Marley. And thank you so much for joining us for this panel. Thank you, Bruce, for your time and your insight on your career and your book. Certainly appreciated the conversation.
Thank you very much for having me.